I don't know if you guys know how this works, probably not, but when it comes to these kinds of agreements, the union will negotiate with the company, and then a list is presented to the workers of here's the list of concessions. There's no debate at the local in terms of the workers on prioritizing what concessions will be accepted, where the limits are in those different areas. And the concession specifically, to give some examples of what I'm talking about, is less union strength on the floor. So giving up union reps, full-time positions on the floor of the plant, holidays, time off work, education. Those are the kinds of things that were being given up. Most importantly, in terms of the structure of the union, was the union reps on the floor. But losing holidays also, and losing break time during the day. So it's part of the broader work intensification that's continuing as well. So the president that was elected after that guy got hired, the articulate radical guy, the president that got elected immediately after him was I'll make the case that he had the smallest bubble around his head in terms of trying to put this auto sector restructuring in a context. He had the most parochial vision. He had the most closed vision. He's not looking out. The guy actually said to me when we were organizing an event, not to personalize it, but the guy actually said when we were organizing an event at the local to talk about how do we respond to this, and largely the response was, well, lobby politicians to subsidize the auto industry, so call up your MP and tell them to give the auto guys cash, right? That was the mobilization strategy. And I was at the organizing meetings for those events at the local, and I was saying, what we really should have is some people to give us some kind of situation analysis, and to say, listen, we reject this logic of competition. We're not in fact competing for jobs. Let's put it in the context of broader North American auto sector restructuring and really have a discussion, a substantive discussion about what our options are in this shitty context, this bad context, right? Nobody likes the context. And the guy said, Ewan, you bring one more thing about globalization to these meetings, I'm going to lock the door. Like, what he's saying is he doesn't want to hear about it, right? He wants to say, here's the concessions, we got to get this stuff, what's the most expedient way to do that, right? So the truck plant was closed, the concessions were accepted, and then, shortly after, 5 months after the negotiations happened, shortly after the collective agreement was sealed, the company comes and says, well, actually, you know, we don't have a new product for that van plant. So this is the other plant, right? We don't have a new product for it, and workers are on rotating layoff in the plant. The truck plant is just closed, so some people have left the plant completely, but hundreds of workers have gone into the new plant. So now there's more workers than there are cars that need to be built, right? And so the company says, we don't actually have a new product for that plant, but you know, we have this list of further concessions that we would like you guys to agree to, and if you do, we might consider, there's no commitment, but we might consider locating that new plant here. And by the way, the Ford plant that's in Atlanta, Georgia, we're thinking about putting it there, and we're talking to the UAW. And the Ford plant that's in Hermosillo, Mexico, we're thinking about putting the new product there, and we're in discussion with those workers. So here's a list of demands, good luck, right? Shortly after that, I was at an event in Detroit called Labor Notes, which for labor movement activists is a great point. It's every second year in Detroit, and there's people from all over North America that come to that event, left trade union activists. So I was at that event, and wouldn't you know it, there was some people from the UAW there, and wouldn't you know it, I got the chance to talk to some guys from the FAT, from the Authentic Labor Front in Mexico. And through translation was able to find out from those guys that the company was blatantly lying, and that Hermosillo already received new investment, and they were already switching over their production models, and that Atlanta was I talked to the UAW guys, and Atlanta was geographically hemmed in by the airport down there. And there's some fallow land in between the plant and the airport, and the companies wanted it for years to expand, and the airport's always said, no way, we're going to need new runways eventually, we can't let you build on it, right? So the reality of the threat, I had substantively disproved, right? Bringing that case to the local, I was just told to get lost with it, right? Oh, we can't actually believe that. How do you actually know that, right? We'll pick up the phone, you can find it out, right? It's actually not that difficult to find it out. So the concessions, the next round of concessions, were effectively sold. The round after that, the third one, was we worked like crazy saying there's no need for, this is right as the economic crisis is looming, right? Right as the storm clouds are gathering. And Ford had again said, you know what, we've agreed that we're going to put this new product here. It's not only putting a new product there, but it's switching that model of production that I was describing earlier, that mass production model where they're making one vehicle, one platform, and pumping them out 24 hours a day. The way that these guys are doing now, when you look at Brampton Chrysler, you look at GM Oshawa, you look at Ford in Oakville now, they're making 3 or 4 different vehicles in the same plant now. And so they have less plants, but they've got intensified production in the remaining plants. And that's what had already been agreed to in Hermosillo, was that they were already switching to that, where they were going to make multiple vehicles off the same platform. They were already doing the construction, right, when Ford was making these threats. And so, once Ford received the concessions and changes to work rules and how work gets organized in the plant in Oakville, they did in fact put the new investment there. But then, well, there's an economic crisis, and so all the companies are using it. Ford's not different than the other employers, right? They're saying, well, let's use it, right? So they come with another list of demands for further concessions, right? And we worked like crazy, about a dozen of us in the Oakville plant, to say, enough's enough. This doesn't make any sense. Ford has a ton of cash on hand. We need to develop an independent perspective and reject this. Not only reject these concessions, but in a broader way, reject the logic of competition. We're not actually in competition for jobs, and the insecurity that the company is pushing in terms of their agenda, making workers feel more insecure, and then that's kind of being parroted and delivered by the union, or at least if it's not being parroted and delivered by the union, it's at least not being deconstructed, right? It's not being criticized. It's not being dispelled. That fear that's generated by the insecurity, right? And with plants closing around, the fear seems more substantive, right? The fear seems more real to workers. The results of working like crazy, building arguments, leafleting, talking to co-workers in the plants, was that for the first time in the history of the Canadian Auto Workers Union, we got a contract rejected. That had never happened in the history of the union before. And it was about 55% that rejected it. But it was an embarrassment. It was the first time this has ever happened, right? It's a turning point in some ways. And it was shortly after that I left the plant with the voluntary buyout. And since I left, there has been one more round of concessions that were sold. And they said at the microphone, like, where are those guys? They took buyouts, right? They ran off. You can't trust those guys, so trust us. And we can keep new product coming to the plant, but you have to keep accepting this logic of concessions. And that happens simultaneously as Ford's demand for concessions in the US and the US workers in the UAW rejecting the concessions in the Ford chain. And so it made it look even worse from the Canadian side, right? I invited a brother. I'm looking at my side because I was hoping he was going to come, but he's not here clearly. A guy who's still working in the plant. He's got 24 years seniority in the plant, and he can map out the mood of the plant in a very, very clear way. And that's why I asked him to come, because he could update you guys on the present feeling in the plant, the present sentiments of workers in the plant, how demoralized people are, how people feel like there's no direction, they don't trust the union anymore. And that doesn't mean that the union's finished in the plant by any means, because not only are people committed to it in principle, but they understand that although things are bad now, things will get better. And there is hope for that, and I think the rejection of that agreement shortly before I left is evidence for that. Workers are smart, they get it, right? But they're being fed on both sides, and so that destabilizes people, right? But that gives a clear sense of where people are at today. And I think the story, in broad terms, offers a good example of a good complement, in fact, to the story from the two previous speakers, where they're talking about the mobility of workers. This is a story about the risks in terms of mobility of capital. Whether it's mobile or not is up for debate, but this is the context for it. And what the story, I think, particularly provides is a clear example of the risk of accepting that logic of competition. Thanks, guys.